All right. Julianne is a researcher in algal taxonomy at the Great Lakes Environmental Center. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Sure, no problem. I get to introduce some of the fun stuff about algae and show you lots of nice photos. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Erica touched on a few of the important things in her talk, but we'll see what we can get through here. First of all, what is algae? Most people don't actually understand that, and there's not a general consensus, but what it is considered an unnatural grouping of organisms. And what that means biologically is that they are not related, closely related evolutionarily. So some of the types of algae are more closely related to us as humans than they are to other types of algae. But ecologically and functionally, they have similarities in the ecosystem. And it's just a huge array of different types of organisms. And while I finish talking about some of the commonalities, which I have outlined on this slide, I'm going to start a little slideshow of a bunch of beautiful pictures of algae while I'm talking about those. So even though they're not related evolutionarily, the primary thing that combines all groups of these organisms into algae is that they are capable, or at least were at some point in history, of photosynthesizing. So they all have something called chlorophyll A, which is the primary photosynthetic pigment. And photosynthesis, if you need a quick reminder, it's when algae and plants, so any photosynthesizers, they can use energy from the sun and use that energy to combine water and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and make sugars out of it. So they use the energy from the sun to make food. So they're primary producers. They're the base of our food chains in our food webs. And all algae can photosynthesize. They all have chlorophyll A. They're mostly aquatic, although not all aquatic. And they're relatively simple body structure. So they're not plants, but because they don't have a lot of differentiation and a lot of specialized areas, but I'll get into a little bit of that later. So hopefully those pictures, I know they went kind of quickly, but there's a lot of them, give you some idea of the wide range of algal types. And I wanted to bring up a couple of evolutionary milestones and just kind of wow factors with algae. As Erica mentioned, algae are billions of years old. Blue-green algae, or cyanobacteria, or cyanophytes they're also called, are about 3.5 billion years old. There's some of the first organisms that were created. And they were the first photosynthesizers, which means they're the first organisms that were producing oxygen. As a result of photosynthesis, you get water and carbon dioxide combining, and then you release oxygen. And before the cyanobacteria, there was very little oxygen in our atmosphere. And after they developed and they started growing, and over the course of millions of years, they allowed oxygen to develop into the atmosphere to a level that allowed our predecessors to evolve. So you can thank blue-green algae for basically all life that's dependent on oxygen production in our atmosphere. And these down here in the corner here, these are stromatolites. Those are some of the remnants of these ancient cyanobacteria cultures. You can find them in different parts of the world. Green algae, which is another of the large groupings, are dated to about 900 million years ago. And other than just being ancient, they also gave rise to the land plants directly. We'll look at some of the algae. There's algae in Michigan that are in the group, or the phylum, that is most closely related, and that's on that direct evolutionary lineages to land plants. And then diatoms, which is another big grouping. These are algae that have believe it or not, they have glass cell walls, they have silica cell walls, they're finely ornamented, they're very ornate. And they've been around, they're some of the younger, the babies of the algae groups. But they also, in that time period, they developed more species than all other photosynthetic groups, except for the flowering plants. And they have become one of the most important groups of organisms for life on Earth today. Just a little bit more about the diversity of algae. The size range is many orders of magnitude, from these small little single-celled bacteria here, cyanobacteria, that are only 3 micrometers long, and the micrometer is 1,000th of a millimeter. So these guys, and the same types that created the oxygen in our atmosphere, are 1,000th of a millimeter long or big. And then they can grow up to these giant kelp. Giant kelp are algae. They still are considered part of the algal group because they're not true plants. If anybody is interested later, I can tell you how we kind of differentiate that. But so from these microscopic single-celled organisms to giant kelp, that's the size range of these things. And they can be these single cells to these giant plant-like structures to this pediastrum here, which is a common alga, and that's just a colony of cells. So each one of these cells can live on its own, but it lives in this complex looking little colony of cells. And then this is Spirogyra, which is another common Michigan alga, and it's a filament, and they're filaments of connected cells. So it's many cells, each connected to make these filaments. Ecologically, they're everywhere. As Erica mentioned, because they're ancient, they've developed to live in any number of environments. They're in the Arctic, they are in hot pools in Yosemite National Park. They're mostly aquatic, so that you're going to find them in every lake, stream, in the oceans, in wetlands, and even in your bird feeders. This is Hematococcus. It will show up in your bird feeder or other small pools of water occasionally. But they grow on desert soils. They grow in your yard. This up here is nostoc and Nostoc commune, and it is one of the common ones in Michigan. You might find it in a yard. A lot of people think it's fungus, but it's not. It's actually a filamentous alga that grows in these weird colonies. And then lichens, algae are a part of lichens. They're a part of the symbiosis. If we didn't have algae and fungus, we wouldn't have lichens. And then even situations where this is a bromeliad or a kind of a rainforest plant, and they tend to collect water in the center of them. And what we find in tops of trees where these bromeliads grow, on trees, little tiny ecosystems with algae as the primary producers develop inside of these bromeliads, and frogs will lay their eggs in there and grow and develop into tadpoles. And that's all, they're using that algae as the primary source. Oh, and up here, this is snow algae. Most people have no idea about that, but there is primarily one type of algae, but there are some others that form this kind of red, they call it watermelon snow. And they live mostly in areas where the snowpack is around all year round. Ecological importance, we touched on them being photosynthesizers, and Erica mentioned it. They are the base of the food web in almost all aquatic ecosystems. They feed the oceans, lakes, rivers, and even some terrestrial ecosystems like I just mentioned to you. They are phytoplankton, is algae that is in the water column. And that is the primary food source for things like zooplankton and benthos and other microcrustaceans that then feed the fish that people like to catch. They are oxygen producers. I explained how cyanobacteria created the oxygen in the ocean atmosphere, but did you know that you can credit marine diatoms, that group of algae that has these glass cell walls, for about 20 to 40% of the oxygen in each breath that you take? So estimates vary a lot because it's hard to determine, but scientists think that marine diatoms or diatoms in the ocean produce 20 to 40% of what is currently in Earth's atmosphere, the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere. So as much as rainforests and other plants. In your lakes and streams, they're habitat other than being food. They're also habitat for other organisms. So they have they form structures that then microorganisms can live on, and those microorganisms are great food for larval fish and up the food chain. They're also nutrient cyclers and sinks. So they remove nutrients out of the water by growing. And that way, in that way, they can be used in some circumstances to remove nutrients from a water column.
Hey, Julianne, this is Erica. So this is about your 3-minute warning. Sorry, I
Oh my
missed the
God.
5-minute
Okay.
mark.
All right. Okay. Let me touch on so an important thing is that they sequester carbon because of this. So they take in these nutrients, they grow, they capture carbon, and then in the oceans, they sink to the deep ocean bottoms, and they can sequester carbon for hundreds and thousands of years by taking out of the atmosphere and out of the water. Let's go. Let me just show you some of the things that you might see. These are some of the groups that you'll find with the naked eye out in your places. So there's benthic green algae. This is Cladophora. Erica talked about a little bit. It's a normal. It only grows to nuisance levels if there's a nutrient runoff. This is Spirogyra and some other things. That's what we call frog spit or pond scum, which is another common organism in lakes and in shallow areas. These guys are the diatoms. They are one of the most important food sources for fisheries going up the line, and outside of being the oxygen producers, and they form these kind of films on rocks and the phytoplankton as well. These are some other cyanobacteria that you might see. They're benthic, meaning they're on the bottom. Most of the halves are filamentous or planktonic. These are some of the halves that you'll see, not all of them. These guys in the left-hand corner are a common seasonal bloom that happens. They're it's called Gliotrichia. They're non-harmful and they're kind of cool. It always reminds me of like a star-filled sky when they bloom. And I guess, and I'll leave with Kara here because this is one of the things that you're going to find in most of the inland lakes around Michigan, or many of them. Most people think they're plants. They're not plants. They're actually Kara or muskgrass or skunkweed is actually algae. And these are some things that are not algae. But I'll stop there. Sorry for taking up too much time there. It's too much to talk about with algae.
You're all good, no worries. Yes, great, thank you. So I'm gonna let Geneva ask any Q&A from the group.
Thank you, Julianne. That was very cool. And I can see why algae are our friends. There are so many different ways that they can exist in the world. One of our guests is wondering, when people talk about algae and how much there is, what are the metrics that they usually use to refer, like what's the metric for them?
That really depends on what scale you're looking at. We tend to look at, often chlorophyll A amounts are used to determine the amount of phytoplankton or the amount of, Cladophora, as it's kind of a surrogate for biomass. So you'll look in per milliliter how much chlorophyll is in an area. We also look at what we call biovolume. So what we'll do is calculate the volume of cell space that is in samples that we get, and then so that would be in micrometers cubed, but then we extrapolate that up to how much would be in what we'd see per milliliter. But in the past, and some people still do something called ash-free dry mass, where what they will do is collect either phytoplankton or benthic algae, and then they'll dry it all down. They'll weigh it before it's dry, or I mean, they'll dry it, they'll weigh it, then they'll burn it and ash it all up, and then measure what is, and then weigh what's left. So they get an idea of how much organic matter is there, and that would be in milligrams or grams. So it's probably a more complicated answer than you were hoping, but it's really relevant to what your question is. Hopefully that gives you some idea.
Yeah, thank you. The question asker was wondering if like cells per milliliter is a metric that one might see, or are cells too, small to actually count?
No, in fact, I count cells, count ID cells, and that's a common way. So yeah, cells per milliliter, biovolume per milliliter, even something called natural units. So that means, a number of colonies per milliliter. But yes, that's a common outcome from a phytoplankton or a periphyton count and ID.
Right. We've got some helpful resources getting dropped in the chat, so be sure to take a look at those, and we'll be adding them to the resources document that we sent out before the webinar, and we'll send out again afterward. Another question, can algae ingest nanoplastics, thereby bioaccumulating plastic up through the food web?
There are only a few algae that are heterotrophic, meaning they eat other things, so they'll ingest other things. And that is certainly possible with those organisms. But another way for nanoplastics to influence algae is simply from the chemicals leaching out of those nanoplastics into the surrounding, the microclimate around the algae and being incorporated into algal cells that way. I don't know what the research says as far as how significant that is, but it's certainly a potential. But as far as ingesting it, it's mostly zooplankton and others that are ingesting the microplastics. But it's a good question.
All right, we'll do a couple more questions out of the Q&A box, and then we can always run back to them at the end of the presentations. Since starry stonewort has become a problem in many Michigan lakes, where does this invasive fit into the algae community?
It is more closely related to Chara. It's, well, no, I'm not, I don't even want to say that. Functionally, it's like Chara or the musk grasses. It could potentially feed organisms, like ducks and other waterfowl, but there aren't a lot of waterfowl that eat it. The problem with it is it grows to in such huge amounts that it can shadow out other more productive or more important algal communities for the ecosystem or other plants. So it fits functionally kind of like Chara would, because it is a macroscopic plant type structure, but it doesn't tend to have a lot of functional uses that we know of in the community, at least at this point.